Welcome to Friday evening at Reloved Guitars, and another Friday evening, and we have in front of us an Ibanez acoustic, which I've been referring to as a parlour guitar, but I don't think that's really what it's called. It's AVN4VMS, but it's a nice small size. It's actually got a pickup which I've moved and put inside the body for a minute. It's got a Seymour Duncan woody sort of acoustic pickup, sound hole pickup, and we'll get that back in place later. But it's in because we're going to improve its playing action given what we've got in front of us and the limitations of doing that. So what do I mean? Well, it's a fairly familiar condition acoustic guitar in that it has, I'll sort of list what it has that I find. It has, well, first of all, it has a lovely tone. It's slightly mahogany-ish tone, but it's quite distinctive, which makes it a nice thing. It has a beautifully polished bone nut, but it's way too high over the first fret, so that's one problem. And it's also it just drags, the strings just drag through here. When I was trying to tune it earlier on, you tune and nothing happens. It's that horrible sort of what's going on. So it's not a direct analog sort of pull. It's weirdly resistant. So it's got too high a first fret action and sticky nut slots. We've got too much relief in the neck at the moment, and down this end we've also got a bit too high a playing action, and down this end we've got not a lot of saddle adjustment room. However, mercifully, we've got a bit more on the treble side available and technically than we do on the bass side, which is good for us. But also, with regard to the bridge itself, the back of the guitar is fairly curved, again, which is quite common in, they say all acoustic guitars are meant to have, or not meant to be dead flat, and they vary. But this one has a fair bit of kind of bulge, a fair bit of bulge, and it does leave you with the feeling that, first of all, this is thicker at the back than the front, but it also has a bit of a lift to it as a result of this sort of bulge. So together they contribute to the slightly higher than desired action. Now, those things seem quite small because anybody could pick this guitar up and play it and around the campfire and say, oh, lovely guitar, and that's it. But I had a very, for me, typical experience, and I mentioned this to Andy on the phone this evening, at risk of offending him deeply. But I said that I picked this guitar up today for a test play. I like to have a play before I come up and do the setup. And when I played it, I first of all struggled. The experience was I struggled to get it in tune. So immediately the flag goes up for me. This is a guitar that just isn't easy to get into tune. Now I know that that's in a large part because of the sticky nut slots, but it's also because the action is too high here, and pressing notes down here, let's see if we can see this in glorious zoom in vision. Down here, that's probably close to a millimeter in height, so playing any notes down here pushes the notes sharp. So you're looking for an F there, and I recorded it, and it's an F with, I think it was 10 cents sharp on it. So you get notes, and it evens out to when you're about the 12th fret, believe it or not, and well, logically it stabilizes the tuning, and that's sort of back to correct pitch. But down here, everything's slightly sharp when you fret, and the result of that, sorry about the camera work, the result of that is that you might, if you're lucky and you get everything perfectly tuned despite the nut, then you start to play it. First of all, you feel it's hard to play and it's kind of tiring, but more importantly, it pushes everything you fret down here goes slightly sharp compared to the unfretted notes, and the result is you get this thing that sounds horrible. It's if you're not musical, you might not notice it, but if you've got a fairly musical ear, you'll not be comfortable with that sound because it just feels slightly wrong. And typically, my experience is if we don't know about that, we tend to go into, I'm doing something wrong, I can't seem to tune this. And we go back into the issue of tuning, which again is a bit unsatisfactory because it doesn't like to tune very smoothly because of the nut. Nothing to do with the tuners, just to do with the nut. Now I'm noticing here that this bad boy is doing locking, stringing knots. I hate these things. I hate stringing knots. You'll see why in a minute. Anyway, they're not necessary, by the way. We'll come to that at the restringing part. So you have this experience of, I can't get it in tune, is what you tell yourself or what your brain tells you. And so you keep trying to retune and you plug it into something else and try tuning it. And then it's tiring, it's not going into tune. It's actually quite hard because your fingers sink down quite a long way between the fingers pushing in there. There's a lot of depth and your fingers are kind of caught on the strings either side of it because you're so far down to get it fretted. And all of that starts to conspire to make me just not want to play it, and I end up putting it back or putting it down. And that's it. And it certainly doesn't become a much sought after guitar, which is a real shame because this is a pretty thing and it's got beautiful construction. Oops, that's the pickup inside, so I won't rattle it too much. Beautiful finish, lovely silk neck or satin neck, nice tuners, very simple but very effective quality tuners. Everything about it is good except the playability. So when Andy brought it round, I was able to have a close look at it. I could see there was some room in the saddle for reduction, which says to me, okay, we can make a little bit of an inroads on this high action here. We can't flatten this out again. We can't change any slight changes that may have happened in the neck joint, which is also quite common. As guitars get older, the neck joint sometimes pushes in like this and pulls away at the back, and it slightly changes the structural shape, allowing the strings to kind of end up going higher. So we can't do anything about that. We can't do anything about the slight bellying at the back here. But what we have got is a bit of room here, and that's sort of an eyeball job. You look at it and you go, okay, look, there's some, first of all, there's some saddle sticking out above the wood, so that tells us we've got something to play with. The most important question, and it is actually the limiting factor when it comes to saddle reductions, is the break angle of the strings over the saddle, and it's usually the oh, that's good for a change. That's really good. It's usually the high E that runs out first. Now the reason for that is, and I'll show it on the board, the reason for that, and this is pleasing to note that this guitar doesn't do it. Let's put it there, and let's put this there, and let me show you what I mean. Zoom out a bit. Right. Most acoustic, or a lot of acoustic guitars, if that's the body neck center line down the guitar, what you tend to find is that they have a bridge here, like, I don't know, something like that, whatever. And on the bridge, you tend to find that they have a saddle on a right-handed guitar that goes, just for argument's sake, like that. So it goes a tilt across. But what they do on the typical right-handed acoustic guitar is that they drill the string, the holes for the string pegs to go through in a right angle line. So it's perpendicular to the center line, whereas we know that the saddle's off at an angle. And so what you get is ultimately you get the low E, you get the A, you get the D, you get the G, you get the B, and you get the E. And as you can see, the distance here is smallish, and it's smaller than the distance here. And as a result of that, on a typical guitar, because this is further away, the break angle, there's the saddle, there's the string. When this is close, the break angle goes like that. But when it's further away, that hole, the break angle thins out. or reduces. So on a regular guitar, the fact that these are in a straight line starts off by constraining you, because it doesn't take long in reducing this, right, before the, let's do it again. So we have a smaller saddle here, lower saddle. It doesn't take long before this break angle is between here and here, which is where it's normally kept, is very small indeed. You can see that there's actually a difference between this one now and that one because of the reduction in height of the saddle. And eventually this becomes too small, or too small an angle. It's this angle here we're looking at, really. Too small of an angle there for the string to press down enough on the saddle to make the vibrations go through to the top effectively, and or through to any piezo pickup you might have underneath the saddle. This doesn't have it, obviously this has a pickup here. But anyway, that's one of the problems. But this guitar, cleverly, if you look at this, they have put through the peg holes, they have made the peg holes follow the slant of the saddle itself, which means unusually we've got more room or more break angle at this end than we would normally have, which gives us a chance to reduce this a fair bit more to get a really nice playing action out of it without losing too much of the down force that we need. So that is a nice little move, Ibanez. Not many guitars are that way designed. So we've got some options here to make this guitar better. We've got, people might find this a bit harsh, despite how beautiful this nut is, and we can, if I can keep my camera still, we can see how, you know, well made it is and all of that. Tough, it's coming out and it's going. We're going to replace it with a tusk nut with Andy's name on it. Tusk nut chosen for the right dimensions, because more than anything, I don't care primarily what a guitar looks like. The first priority in the guitar is that it's playable and it stays in tune, or the other way around, it stays in tune actually. Even if it's got a lovely action, the truth is if it doesn't stay in tune, you won't play it. So I need something that plays and stays in tune. Then I want it to have a nice playable action that won't exhaust me and frustrate me. And then I kind of want it to sound good and look good. Actually, the looking good bit kind of comes far down the line. Now it's interesting that maybe that was a different priority when we were kids and we didn't kind of know what we were looking at. We'd take things on the brand name. Now the brand name to me is right at the bottom of the list. I don't care what the brand is. If it plays in tune, if it feels nice to play, if it sounds good, I'll take all of those above any brand price point, or even how it looks. I'll go with a guitar that plays well. So it's kind of like reverse the priorities of that I had when I was a teenager, which is quite an interesting shift. But as a guitar tech, now I focus on those priorities that way around. And it's actually interesting. I'm going to put them down because the interesting thing is I can tell when, if and when a customer gets in touch with me who isn't my ideal customer. So, for example, you know, if they're in the olden days, their obsession was brand, or my obsession was brand, then it would be the look, and then it would be the sound, and then it would be playability, and it would be kind of finally if it stays in tune or not. And as you can see, it's now completely the opposite way around. The new order is stay and play in tune, got to be playable, it's got to sound good, but I'll even play it if it doesn't sound perfect. You know, if it's playable and stays in tune, I'll still reach for it above another one that sounds better but isn't playable in terms of its action and doesn't stay in tune. And then what it looks like and who it's made by. So it's complete reversal of those priorities. And like I said, sometimes if I get a customer who comes through and speaks from this priority, I kind of, I'm on guard to say to them I might not be the right guy for you to do your work, because I don't focus on that, I focus on that way around. Anyway, enough of that. So we're going to get into this. Now to do this, I'm going to just put you over here and go on a long shot for the time being until I can think about when and where we need to zoom in. But I'm conscious that I seem to have been doing a lot of filming of useless empty space recently. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the nut out of the pack. We've also got new D'Addario phosphor bronze strings, 1152s. One of the things Andy and I talked about was that he was considering whether he should go lighter on the gauge of the string, and sort of self-interestedly, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I suggested that he stayed with the 1152 at least for one go, and the reason for that is he's paying me to improve the playability of this guitar, including its staying in tune ability, and I want him to be able to clearly perceive the differences that I will have made with the things I do, and that has two reasons for it. One is so that it's a selfish reason for me as a business, he can completely tangibly appreciate what I've done. That's really important to me, that he knows that the money he spent was value, and he knows why, he knows what improvements it made. But the other part is so that he knows for himself what the difference these treatments made. So if you add another variable into the mix, like at the same point as this, changing your strings for a different gauge, you don't kind of know which of the things made the most difference. So I'm trying to reduce the number of things, and of course he can change that out in a week once he's played it and experienced the difference that we've made in this setup. So that's the important thing to me, and it is a bit self-interest for me, but it's also, I think, a good move for him. Now there we go, D'Addarios. These can go back in the box for a minute. The empty nut thing in the bin. Okay, so here's the thing. What have we got to do? We've got to reduce this playing action here, and then we've got to end up setting a playing action down at the nut, and we've got to make an adjustment to the truss rod. And the reason I took the pickup out of there is so that we can access the truss rod adjuster, because it's quite far in there, or you couldn't get past the, what you call it, that thing. So I've got to try and find, we couldn't get past the pickup is what I'm trying to say. So now I have to find a suitable hex key, and we're going to just have a little feel around and see what the sizes feel like. That's not the right size. It'd probably be easier to do this with the string slack. It just makes every bit of it harder. So the question, I think, is, these, in a guitar's playing action, these three things, the neck relief, the nut and the saddle, are interrelated, and they affect each other. So which one do you change first without messing it up? Well, we know we're going to change the nut, and that means that whatever we do here and with the neck relief, we're going to need to adjust the nut to suit. That's one way we can look at it. And if we do it from that way round, then we could consider leaving the nut to last. And I would suggest doing that if we're going to make an adjustment down here. Now, that leaves us with the neck relief, and I suggest that the neck relief is what we do first, and there's a reason for this, which is, it sounds a bit abstract if you don't do this all the time, and the reason I would do the relief first is that I don't adjust the relief for the purpose of changing the action. Now, it does change the action when you adjust the relief. It has an effect on the action, but I don't do it to change the action. My primary purpose for adjusting the neck relief is to set a small amount of curvature. This is too big. Small amount of curvature of the neck, enough to allow the strings to swing inside of there. Now that is the sort of primary reason why I'm doing it. No other real reason. But having said that, it does have an impact on the, I'm going to just put this in and just feel it. I'm trying to get a feel for what is the right size. Yeah, so adjusting the neck relief definitely does have an impact on the action at the center of the neck. But it's helpful not to think of it from the point of view of doing it purely to change the action. So we think of it as, if we're doing it first, we think of it as a means of creating sufficient space for the strings on this guitar to move. And then it comes to a question that people will say, how much room do they need? Okay, so I think this is the right size, but we don't want the big L-shaped one. We want a smaller one so we can turn it. Now this one, there was too much relief in the neck, so what I'm going to aim to do is now to turn it, which I've done, and put some tightening into it clockwise. So I want to flatten it out a little bit. So this is my first of the 3 adjustments, and I'm doing it without adjusting the other 2. I'm doing it from the point of view of how much room is there for my strings to move, and how much do I need? And my answer has always been slightly more than none, which I think can be a slightly infuriating answer. But you'll see what I mean. Now I'm going to put these, or tune these up approximately, because I do want the amount correct, approximately the correct amount of loading on the strings. Listen out as I do this tuning. Listen out to how unresponsive the tuners are. Try and watch. And, let me zoom in on my hands a minute. Let's see if you can see. Listen and watch as I tune. So get my note again, reference note. And maybe it's not easy to tell. Probably not easy to see. There was a little creak there, too tight. Well, you may not be able to see it, but you may have had that experience, so you might refer to that when you turn the tuners and it sort of gets there eventually, but it's not confidence inspiring. It doesn't get there in a sort of direct fashion. It feels like it lags. That's maybe the best way. Now this is still a little bit too much. Now this is how you measure the amount of curvature in your neck. You hold down the low E string on your first and your last fret. Some people use different fret numbers, but I go with the whole thing. And then you use your thumb to just check, press down the string in approximately the middle between those 2 points, either fret, just one of those right close to the middle, and you're looking at how much gap there is. Now there is, first of all, a gap. It's still about 3/4 of a mil, and I'm going to want less than that, but there's definitely a gap, rule 1. And your rule of thumb is that you want slightly more than none in your guitar of any kind. In an acoustic guitar, I would suggest you might want slightly more again than just none, so we might be willing to go up to maybe 1/4 of a mil or something like that. Now what I'm just doing here is, you notice the first time I took the strings off and then tightened them back up to try and check what we'd achieved. Here I'm going to try and make an adjustment without taking the strings off. Now I'm making an assumption here which is based on normal guitars across the centuries, well, the vast majority of guitars, the neck goes from curved to flat when you tighten clockwise. But some strange guitars, including some from Japan that I've had in the past, some vintage ones from Japan, don't do that. They actually work back to front. And when you have a guitar that does that, you are in an interesting position, because you have to spot it quickly, otherwise you'll just keep on turning and you will not get where you need to get. But in this case, it is reducing. Now I'm using a longer L shaped because I need a little bit more leverage, and I'm going to sort of hold it in to make sure it stays in while I give it a little bit more of a push. So we're putting quite a lot of pressure on the truss rod because I want this gap to come down, and it's still quite high. So again, but you've got to remember, I'm only doing little tiny movements each time, but I'm going in the right direction, and I'm going to try and get me a little bit more adjustment on there. So there's another, how many degrees of a circle, whatever it is. Okay, so it is making a difference, but it's quite slow. That's okay. Of course, you're better off being able to do this once you've made sure you've got the right adjuster and everything turns. Wrong one. You want to do it with the strings on, if at all possible, because that's the only way you're going to see the actual effect of the adjustment when the strings are loaded, because the truss rod is counteracting the neck's tendency to bow or go into a relief curve. So we get in there. I'm going to hold off for a minute because it may still adjust a little bit afterwards, but we know it's adjusting. We can go back and do a bit more if we want to. Now, at this point, having flattened the neck out, we will have lowered a little bit the action at both points that we're interested in, the first and the last frets. But they're still going to be a little too high for what we want, and we can confirm it if we want to at this point with measurement devices. I don't tend to use them too much, but they can be good for just checking roughly where you are. So I like to work with a 0.3 or on acoustic at most 0.4 of a mil over the first fret, and this one now is about just a little over 0.4. So there's a little bit of adjustment, but we're not going to adjust that nut. What I wanted to see is how close is this current nut from where I'd want it, and it's, excuse me, it's very close, which means now if I'm confident I've got the neck flatter the way I like it, I'm confident this is almost where it would be in the final washout. Now I can adjust this thinking that the rest is pretty much where I want it to be. So I'm now going to work on this saddle with the view to reducing the action here. Now, of course, as you know, reducing the action here is also going to lower it a tiny bit down here. So again, it's back and forth, which is going to adjust the other one most. First one is almost certainly do the flattening of the neck if that's what you know that you want, because you're doing it to reduce the amount of space. You want just a small amount of space for the strings. You don't need a huge gap in the center of the neck. Once we've set that to a sort of known very small amount, which is about at most 0.2 of a millimeter, measured somewhere in the middle, and we can find that out by putting a capo on here, holding this one down and sticking a feeler gauge under there if we want to. We can find the capo knocking about in here. Yeah, there's one. Not the best capo in the world, but it's okay for this sort of thing. So we can capo off all of that, then we can hold down there, and then we can go in the middle. Now actually this is still too high. This is a little over 0.4 still, so we've still got room to take it down. So let's do that while we're still talking about it, and we're getting closer to where we want to be. Very important that when you put in the key and you start to turn it, you make sure that it's sitting in there absolutely positively. What you don't want to do is just catch it and scuff it around the edge, and if you do that or you use the wrong size thing, you'll end up sort sort of scraping off the hex shape. Okay, well this is now down a little bit more, so I'm going to carry on with that. So we know we're going to remove that, but we can leave it on here for now if we want, or we could change it out now. I suggest we leave it on here for now, since it's quite close to where we want it to be, except for the fact it doesn't do tuning very well and it causes friction, so we're going to lose it for that reason. But in terms of height over the first fret, we're quite close to where we'd want to be. So that with the correct relief, the correct nut for the time being, now we can adjust this. And then we have a little calculation to do, which is fairly crude, but it's workable. And so the calculation would be, what's the height currently? And I measure at the last fret. Other people will go ape shit about that. And we've got actually not a bad last fret height at the moment. Now I'm having thoughts about this. I think we're only a tiny bit off. But Andy said he would like it the way I have mine, right? So it's a tiny bit higher, but on a very plus side, before I take the strings off, on the plus side it's a fraction more higher than I would have mine. So what I'm going to do is measure what it actually is. So it's 0.5 millimeter higher on the bass side than I would have mine. Now this has changed because of the change in the relief part of it, and well, mainly the relief part at this point in time. But we've got a bit of room to lower it on this side, which is 0.5 millimeter too high. So overall we could lose 0.5 millimeter of height here, but because it's up here, it's going to be well, if it was 12th, it would be twice that number, but it's not. It's a third of the way, so it's, you could call it 1.3, 1 1/3 times. Let's find a calculator. Calculator. Tools. Calculator. Call it 1.3 instead of 1.5. Calculator. So we call it 1.3 times 0.5 mil on each side. 1.3 times 0.5 gives us 0.65. We want to take 0.65 off there to give us the 0.5 reduction there. So 0.65. I'm going to write it down so I don't forget. 0.65 down. So that's the most we want to take down. So it's not a huge adjustment, but it's going to combine with the adjustment of the nut and the adjustment in the height of the curvature of the neck. It's going to make all the difference. So I'm taking these off now, slackening them so I can get the saddle up. And so you can see that, well, I guess the point I'm trying to get across here is that a small number of small changes, because these are relatively small changes, there's nothing massive going on here. A small number of small changes is going to transform the way this plays, and but all of them, I suppose you could say, are they're not sort of. Could you do it without changing the nut? You could lower. You could get some nut files, lower the slots to where you want them. You could ensure with the same nut files that they were the correct width, so they didn't grab the strings anymore. But while we're at it, rather than work on that nut, I would prefer to use the replacement tusk nut, which has the built-in Teflon from the get-go, which is the best chance you'll have of it staying and playing in tune. So yes, you could keep the original nut, and you could take down the existing saddle. But oops, that's the pickup again. But you have to go through the process of working out which of them which you're going to make the adjustments on, and how much adjustment, and which you're going to do first, and so on. So it's a good example of small changes making profound differences. And I'm going to try and get a bit of a pencil sharpened here, but I need to put on my buying list a bunch of better quality blades, because these don't really cut the pencils sharpen the pencils very well, they tend to just end up breaking the lead because they're too blunt overall. I'll try. Come on, you can do it. Anyway. So I guess the story here is that the adjustments aren't rocket science. They're small, they have a logic to them, and they are they're easily done if you take care and you think it through. Now, the amount of this actual reduction is almost so small that you can barely mark it on here. So I'm just going to make a mark and then do a parallel line because we're at the sort of amount of reduction that it's almost impossible to measure what we're going to do. So it's a matter of marking it up and then going for it. So this is pencil line. It's actually not. Maybe it's doable. Okay, so again, if you're going to do this yourself, be prepared with things you need. So a board of some sort with sandpaper on it is really helpful. And I'm going to turn it around. If you've got lots of material to take off, heavier grit sandpaper is good. You can do the sort of gross adjustment first, and then you can sort of hone it on the finer stuff. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start on the finer stuff. And the challenge you've got is, I guess I'll use this again for a sec. The challenge you've got when adjusting the saddle is to make sure that you're cutting in a square thing. So you've got basically a slot in your bridge that the saddle has to fit into, and we're taking it down by 0.65, and what you need is for the saddle to be snug there in both sides, and you need it to be square at the bottom here, a 90 degrees angle, so that it sits in perpendicular to the surface of the guitar or to the slot that it's sitting in. If we cut it wrong and cut it like that, for example, it will try to lean backwards because this bit will want to sit flat, so the rest of it will tilt backwards, or worse, we do it the other way and it will tilt forwards. If it tilts forward, what you often get is a saddle that sort of sits like that, where there's the point where the string should come off, but actually it starts there, and you've moved the point forward by 1 millimeter or something. So leaning saddles are definitely not good. So the challenge is, how do we, by hand, how do we take down a tiny amount off a saddle and keep it perpendicular? Well, it's going to be by eye. It's as simple as that. I've got a small amount of material to take off. I'm not sure I trust this material, this thing. I've got some better stuff here, although it's not longer strips. Let's ignore that. Let's go back to the less good paper, but the longer run, and there is reason for that, I'll tell you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by standing the thing up and finding its flat point, like so, and I'm going to place it on there, and I'm going to hold it there with my big hands. Now you can't really see what the heck I'm doing here, it's not very clear, so I'm going to hold it. Now the last thing the thing I'm not going to do, so I get a demonstration thing, I am not going to get it and go, and if you see, it's a silly bit of acting, but if you see what I'm doing, I'm this is what I'm doing. Look from the other camera. You're kind of tempted to do that. I'm not doing that. So what I am going to do to give myself the best chance of keeping it straight is, instead of doing that, I'm going to hold this in position, and then again, overhead camera, I'm going to move the whole of me side to side. So I have the best chance of keeping this exactly in the same orientation that it was. It sounds a silly little thing, and it looks like a silly ballet, but it's definitely worth it. So here we go. I'm going to find a good bit of sandpaper to work on. I'm going to press down, get that nice and firm, and I'm now going to equal pressure all the way along, or at least in 2 points, sort of where I've got it here. You can see on the overhead, well, sorry, the close-up-ish camera. And now I'm going to run side to side with my feet, more my legs, swing from side to side, and here we go. Now I can now stop and look at it. The bottom is pretty good. We haven't covered the distance yet, but actually we've gone a little bit off in a slant, which is not the end of the world. So you just need to know which side you're slanting to. And if I put it to stand up there, I can actually see it's tilting forward that way now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start there again, and I'm going to just force it slightly into the upright. Do the same movements, not press very hard, because I'm now looking to gently rub off this slanty bit and get this back to as close to a vertical or perpendicular as I can. And so I'm not really pushing that hard, I'm just letting the side to side work it, and that's perfectly good. Now the question is, how close to the line are we? I think we are very close to the line. You can see we've taken a bit of material, that's fine, it's working. I'm just going to have one more look. I think we can run a tiny bit more material. Let's find it, how it seats. At the moment it's probably got just a slight unevenness on the bottom, which I want to still iron out. So I'm just going to get it to where it wants to sit, kind of like so, and I'm going to bring it into the upright very slightly, and I'm still going to walk it from side to side, and I'm looking directly down on it so that I get as little movement away from the vertical as is possible, and I'm just letting the side to side movement take it down. Now you could probably make some sort of jig to do this, but I'm just using my old hands. So that's done. Right, I've kept the, you won't be able to see it unless I zoom right in. It's nice, and this bit here, nice and thingy perpendicular. So that's as much as I want to do. I think also that's enough height, and we'll check it again in a second when we put it back in the guitar. So this is out the way. Having a prepped sanding board is vital to any sort of saddle work or nut work like this. And we may need it again when we come to the nut. So what I'm going to now do is bring the guitar back, minding out that the pickup is still loose inside. And the thing we want to do now is we want to gently remove the nut. Now the nut, first of all, isn't lacquered in to any particular, it's not been put in and then lacquered all over. So we can afford to do a small tap and get it to move. And it's a beautifully fitted thing. So what I'm going to do straight away is make a quick visual comparison. They're almost identical, so this should drop straight in, possibly only for the width. This is a fraction wider. So with that in mind, and with the slot still there, what I'll just do is just confirm that. So this is where the micrometer caliper comes in really handy. So this is telling me 578, and this is telling me probably 5.9. So we are a little bit thicker. This is so precisely cut, we want to make sure this works perfectly. So we get another board of some sort. This is a pretty soft, quite old one now, but we start on here, and we start by, first of all, just taking off the unevenness off the face of this nut. Tusk nuts have a slightly moulded gloop on the front. It's not ground glass flat, so I can see there's a recessed bit still in there. So there's a little bit of sort of finishing to do in that respect, and of course that will, once we've done that, that will adjust the thickness just very slightly. But when it's done, the front face of the nut will be dead flat. Still a little hollow in the middle. I mean, just for fun, I can draw it in. You won't be able to see it from there, but if I draw it in, it's still showing a hollow along here. Okay, but once we get down there, we'll be coming closer to the drop-in width, thickness. So change it over, turn the nut round, I've done it a bit that way, do it a bit this side, and again we're pressing down in the middle or equally if we can, and then just trying to get that basic face flatness. And we're pretty much, and there's a tiny gap still, but we're just working it down and we're just trying it. Now it's starting to fit into there. So I can be fairly confident that as soon as we get it dead flat or smooth, we'll be pretty much in the realm of fitting it straight in. So that's good. And again, there's just a hint of that depression still in there, but we really are now getting close to fitting it. So it's just very slow and small amounts being taken off. We don't want to do any rough work that's greedy on materials. So dead flat there will fit up nicely to the edge. Now obviously I'm putting dust on the thing, and that's okay. So we're still just a fraction oversized. Sometimes there may be a bit of glue on the front face of the fingerboard end, which you might want to look at and then potentially take off. There might also be a little tiny lip on the back edge of this nut, which I'm just going to possibly take off now, which also may be just holding it up from fitting, and we're nearly there. That's almost perfect to fit. Now what we don't know, of course, is if it's almost a perfect fit from the height of the strings, but that's step by step. We'll start with the fit in terms of its seating. So let's zoom in. I can probably see now better than I can see with my eye. That's the, look at that. That's a beautiful fit. A little blemish there on the side of the edge of the nut, but that's okay. But you can see how perfectly that now fits, and as a result, oh hello, as a result it's tight, it doesn't go anywhere. The only thing I want to make sure is that it's seated exactly as perfectly at the other end, and you can see it is, with possibly a little bit of a sit up there, which I've pressed down now. Now I don't know what's causing that, whether it's a very small inaccuracy or something, blemish on the underside of the nut, but we can take care of that. I sort of avoid doing that to begin with because I don't want to, if in case we're too close to the mark already, I don't want to take anything down, but we may have just like a little blip, technical term. And also what we can do is just see if there's anything obviously sticking up here. There is a bit of glue on the surface there, and then we can see if there's any material standing proud, but I don't want to do too much digging work there. Let's begin that fit is pretty spectacular. Now what we're going to do is we're going to test it for its fit in respect of the height of the action, because then we'll have to do an adjustment. So I'm going to do up the D first and then the G, and then that just stops the nut from moving anywhere we don't want it to move. And then all the rest in whatever order suits us. Now, one of the things I did notice is that the strings on the saddle, or the saddle where it's notched, seems to keep one of the strings slightly different spacing to the others, but let's see if anything's doable about that in a minute. Okay. Now, I'm looking now, straight away I can see this is incredibly low down here, which tells me that this neck is very flexible because we've taken the loading off it, and we're going to probably see, oh no, it's the fact we've taken the saddle out of it. Duh. That's what I was trying to do the saddle. I was thinking it's bent backwards so much that it's lowered the action out of that end, which is possible, but it's more likely that we haven't put the saddle in, which would be a smart move. Goes off waffling, making things up. So anyway, let's take this out of the way and let's put the reduced saddle in. Now there's no under saddle pickup to need accommodating, so we can just slide it in without too much worry. Obviously the strings have to be just about loose enough for that to happen. Okay, and we'll start that again. Do the D first. Wank. So this point now we're doing well. We've got the reduction we needed on the saddle. We've got the neck flattened out to where we want it. We've got a replacement nut in, fitted perfectly, width-wise front to back, and width-wise, depth-wise front to back, and width-wise end to end, side to side. Wrong bloody thing. And over the top you come. Okay, so now we're back in place. Yeah, this one is a little bit. I might have to try and stop the notch being where it is, because it's just slightly off spaced. Anyway, that's a tiny detail. So now let's look at get it into a pitch. Linear, beautiful. Delicious. Oops, sorry, pick up. Great. Super. Okay, that's fine. That's playing and sounding beautiful compared to how it was. Now we look at the action down here and we say, what have we got? We're going to go for a slightly higher than electric, so we're going to go for 0.4 on this one. And here we've got double that probably at the moment. So let's take a 0.9 mix of things as a start point. It's probably not as high as that. Blimey. On the treble side, I'm going to call it 0.85 on the treble side, and I'm going to look at a similar thing on the bass side. Same again. I said technically it's 9, but let's call it 0.85 to be safe. So that gives us an idea. That means I need to remove 0.45 from both of those sides of the nut to get it down to where I want it. Now the great thing about having a digital caliper is you can really do that. So again, we slack off the strings. This is again why, even if your strings are brand new, I end up always recommending, or I insist that we fit new strings after a setup, because you can see we do quite a bit of offing and onning of these strings, and it does stress them so that their liability to break increases as we take them on and off like so. Now I'm going to gently put this out the way again. Thank you, pickup. And now we've got a straightforward challenge on the nut here. Again, we'll get the grinding board out, and we know that we're going to take 0.45 off. Now I'm not going to draw a line for that. I'm going to do it a different way this time. I'm going to draw me a little picture of the nut on my board, and I'm going to measure a dimension at a given point. So I'm going to, as far as I can, I'm going to place the caliper at the into the high E slot, and it measures 8.08, and I'm going to place it into the wider low E slot, and it's going to measure 769, which is kind of what you'd expect because it does the caliper goes further into the thing. What did I say? 769. All right, 770. I don't know what that is out there making all that rumbling noise. Okay, but we know what the measurement is at each end, and we know we want to take 0.45 off each of these. So minus 0.45 on 808 gives us 7.63. We'll call it 7.6. So 7.6 plus 0.5 equals 8.05. Right, we'll say we're aiming for 7.6. This one, 7.7, take off 0.5, gives us 7.2, I would think. Let's reverse it. 7.2 plus 0.45 is, what did I say it was? 7 point, no, hellfire. No, it's, sorry, I'm doing that wrong. 7.7, it should be, yeah, 7 point, my thing is wearing out. 7.2 is 6.5, yeah, 7.2. Ooh, the Hell's Angels are coming in. Right, so 7.6 on the treble side, 7.2 on the bass side. And what I'm going to do is just try and take out that little blemish, if I can, a little bit, because it was looking a bit funny. Okay, so now that means instead of chasing a line, I'm going to now concentrate on sanding this thing down using the same technique, and I'm going to take it down and move from side to side, and I'm going to stop and then just measure what we've got. Now, for all I know, I could have gone too far. 7.36, I'm aiming for 7.2, 7.7, and so I'm about a tenth of a mil. As far as I'm concerned, that's probably time to turn it round to the light one. So I'm very careful now, and I'm going to just look to square this out now perfectly. I'm just putting a little tiny bit of back pressure on it to square it, so I know that it's perpendicular, and check it visually. It looks good. So we want 7.2 on the bass side in the notch. Okay, 7.4. Let's try it again. I don't want a different answer, honestly. 7.4, okay, and 7.6. So we're good on the treble side. So it's the bass side has a little bit of extra work to do. So I'm just going to quite literally lean some pressure on the bass end of this, and we may just sort of take a fraction off the treble end as well, but just concentrating on the bass end of it, and we should be very close to where we need to be. It's looking nice and square. Treble end 7.6 perfectly. 7.4 still a bit much on the treble end. Let's just examine this again. Let's stick to where I'm at. So again, just putting the pressure on the bass side only. Running it along. So we're very, very close. Now the reason I'm taking such care with this is I don't want to, I'm trying to avoid cutting the nut slots. I could just chuck this nut in, it's perfect as it is, and just make the adjustments with the nut files. That's entirely forgivable, but I'm trying to do it without that. So my first aim is to end up with the slots at exactly the right height, or the correct first fret action with the nut slots untouched by files, because however we try it, the files do they are ragged to a degree, and they do cause a less than smooth thingy slot. So the idea here being, if we just concentrate on getting the perfect height by these measurements that we've done, then we can install this nut with exactly the right first fret action on the guitar without any cuts in the slots. You get what I'm saying, don't you? So here we are, and now I think it's probably a good idea now to retrieve the Mr. Woody, the pickup. Where have you gone, Woody? There you are. Alright. I have not got small enough hands for this game. Right, so here we have it. Let's put it in this, go this way. I think I have to do it from above, don't I? Do it from above. You'll never do it from below. There we are. Okay. So there is our pickup. Here is our nut. I'm going to place this. I'm going to check it. And we're going to, once we're confident that it's the right action everywhere, then we'll put a dab of glue on the nut to get it to stay in place. Now, as we're looking at this, I'm expecting to see a tiny bit of marking where the strings sit on the nut, and we see it at the very front edge. You'll see a bit of dirt from the strings playing on dirtying the front edge of the nut. That's absolutely fine. That means the string is touching the nut in exactly the right place, which is a good sign. So everything's going well. And so the last step will be to glue the nut in place to clean the dust off the guitar from the fact that we've been doing stuff with the saddle and the nut, and put new strings on. The directness of that tuning now is beautiful. Don't forget, when you unslack and retighten strings, you have to go through the stretching process, because it's like you're putting them on new again to a degree. Lovely. Funnily enough, I would say we're up a fraction at the treble end, higher than I'd want to be, but that's because it's not quite seated. That's right, there was a tiny little bit of gap there, so I pushed that down. So we have to be very careful when we glue it, is to get it pressured down fully as quickly as we can before the glue sets. Like I said, I don't know if you can see from over there, there's a slightly visually annoying discrepancy in the spacing here. See this one? It seems to keep setting itself back over there. It's a problem with the saddle. The tiniest of notches there will actually probably make a much better difference than no notch at all. So what I think I'm going to do is not even with, I can't find the darn thing now, somewhere over the rainbow, somewhere, we can, I don't know how well you can see anything, get hold of the, oh yeah, you can see it, got the mirror. Right, so there is, let me just check this, a slight, it's interesting because it's because of the notch on the actual guitar bridge. This thing is trying to come out in a different position, which is not great, but I can see the position it's trying to go to. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to, using this, I'm going to make the very slightest assistance notch, and we're going to put it there. Right, that's where it wants to be. Now we have what I'm going to do is when we come to fit the new strings, I'm going to check to see whether we can rotate this or make sure this string comes out in a better position to fit with that, because we don't want it to be as much off the other way as it was. It's quite difficult to get it there precisely, but it was annoying me the other way around. Okay, so as we come towards the fun end of this, let's just move a few things out of the way. We've got our strings, we need our do our upper thing, power screwdriver. Let's come down to here. So the guitar's in good clean condition, so I don't have to do any massive deep cleaning treatments. I'm trying to zoom out for a minute. There we go. But I will, when we take these off, I will give it a little bit of a dust down to make sure it's nice and clean. So right, so here's the reason I don't like these knotty things. Let's even zoom in a tiny bit further and see what we can see. Right, there we are, headstock view. So these knotty things, so on the bass strings, not too much of a problem. So let's undo it. As you can see, there's too much slack on there. That's the first observation. So we don't need that much coils. And then this knotting business here doesn't achieve anything. Now I know the logic or the rationale behind it is people think if they coil the string like that, it'll stop the string ever possibly coming undone. I can promise you now that strings will never come undone, only if you have the correct minimum amount of coils around the post. And that's not difficult to do, so we'll show how to do it. But the problem with this now is that on the big strings I have to do a bit of bending and yanking, and that thing always comes out and hits me like a hammer right there. So there's one reason guitar techs hate that technique. There's absolutely no way to avoid it. So here's the other one. The other reason we hate it is because now it's getting smaller, right, and I can't get my hand in without puncturing myself to lift off this little locking device you put on it. And then I start having to use devices in here. And the more devices I start getting into this area here, the more likely you're going to get damage somewhere on your finish. So I've managed to pull that off there. I'm going to stretch it out to there, and I'm going to try and stand clear of it. So I have to say this locking thing just increases the chance of your guitar getting damaged and me getting hurt, neither of which I'm very happy about. So we don't need to do it. It doesn't achieve any benefit for the downsides. So, and often what happens is it will either come off easily, or we get down into a little sort of poking and scraping game. There's too much material on here by miles that will store up loads of slack. But now we're down to this last little bit, and I've got to wiggle and woggle, and then I've got to sort of try and pull it out. It's going to come out, but often it'll end up cutting me, which isn't welcome, as you can imagine. All right, so I'm going to hope that you're a convert, Andy, and never ever want to do that again. Right, let's just go down the other end. Let's zoom out till we've got a long view. Actually, let's dig down here with a better view. So the thing I was talking about was to what are we going to use? Where's it gone? Oh yeah, this, we use these. I'm going to take these out now. I just use a fret puller to just lightly go underneath those and just get a little bit of a rocking motion going so they come out. And I'm going to do my best to make sure that the next one we put in puts that B string exiting the hole in the right place, because we don't need it coming out in the wrong place. So there's our strings. We're going to give the board a clean with naphtha, and then we're going to re-oil it, and then we're going to put the nut in place and put the new strings on. So those can go in the bin. They've done their time. So the great thing about acoustic guitars like this is that we can make a lot of difference with some very small, careful adjustments. And you know, these are small adjustments, which is why I like them. And they can, I love how such a small set of adjustments can make such a big impact on the playability. You know, I suppose when I first discovered how big a difference it could make, American friends, you notice I didn't say big of a difference. I said how big a difference. Like the other thing that our American friends say that drives British people mad if they're impolite enough to tell them, and that is when you say I could care less. It doesn't mean anything. I couldn't care less means I really couldn't care any less, which means I care so little about this you won't believe it. That's why we say I couldn't care less. But if you say I could care less, means you actually care about the situation you're trying to tell someone you don't care about. It's just funny how that became stuck in American English. But anyway, you'll find that it's a sort of grammar police, brings out the grammar police in us Brits. And it's big of, how big of a difference it makes. No, it's not English. How big a difference. Big of. Somebody must have put that in there because it makes it feel more comfortable. The syntactic structure must feel more comfortable to the person who put that in there. But it isn't necessary. And yet, it's interesting, of course, is that British people, young British people, copy what they hear on the internet. Sounds very old-fashioned, but you know, we have now a sort of digital language, sort of shared English version of English, or internet English, and of course that British youngsters, oh, there goes the saddle. British youngsters will increasingly be saying big of a difference, small of a business, big of an issue. I feel like there's a gap between big, not that big, an issue, big an issue. Anyway, just interesting stuff. But there we are. So here we go with our slightly double-notched saddle. We've got all the dust off. Now we're going to do a bit of ye olde oil, just to, people say rehydrate. It's another misnomer. You don't hydrate something with oil, but you do replace the oil that you take off with a cleaning solvent, like that stuff I was just using, which is naphtha. So it pulls out oils out of things, breaks down oils. So we're just going to put a bit of oil back on sit on the surface, and some of it will be sink in a bit, but mostly wood really doesn't absorb oil terribly well. It will, if anything, it will sit as a surface layer. And of course it does make vintage necks, fingerboards look good, and rosewood looks great with the unhealthy mixture of human subcutaneous oils and skin cells and other unmentionable substances. They all conspire to produce a sort of well lived in, darkened, mysterious ancient wood look, but there's nothing particularly natural about them or good for the wood particularly, other than it's just a a surface layer that can protect it from other things. But woods generally, apart from a few varieties which historians will remember, I think was it Lignum vitae, a particular wood in the 1800s, was used by the clockmakers, naval clockmakers. Harrison, what was his name? Not George. Thingy Harrison, the guy who made some of the first naval clocks so they could measure the longitude and latitude. And he made those clocks. Blimey, this isn't going to move at all. I think this is almost. Let's leave it. Let's not put any glue in it. Glue is an unwelcome addition. If we don't need it, we don't put it. I would just suggest if this ever does come away or pop off, which it shouldn't do, then a tiny dab of glue and place it in there. But I'm happier to see it without glue to start off with. So I'm going to put in strings first of all, festival, and down at this end, it's always a bit of a dark art. You got to push the ball in, but not all the way down. You want to push it in so it goes in, but then you want to pull it so it comes up the groove. So it eventually ends up sort of halfway up the length of the plastic pin, in a sort of slightly strange wedged position that you would be hard to describe exactly where it is. And some of them don't want to do that, and some of them do. But your aim is to try and get them to that position so they don't go pop and jump up. Now I've managed to somehow, how did I do that? That is, oh, there it is. I was going to say that's impossible. I can't have lost a peg in that short a time. I'm good at losing things, but not necessarily that good. Okay, so here we go. Now this one I want to make sure it comes out as deadly square as it can, and it's trying to come out right in the middle. We'll see. Alright, so we're all fitted at that there end. Now this is the important bit where I'm going to condescendingly talk to Andy like we're in school. But this is how I do the stringing. So in principle, if you do it this way, you'll never have to put a knotty thing into your strings. So I'm going to turn them all round so that they're lined, the holes are lined up. Just makes it easier. And here, and here. In fact, these are undoing at the moment, that's okay. I will switch direction now. Right, so we'll start with our middle ones, just as a good practice in case the nut is loose. You don't want it firing off sideways. So the D goes in. Now I pull it all the way through, taut, and then I hold the string at the first fret and I pull it back one fret's worth and start winding. And hold it as the wind starts, and then I pull it taut, holding it tight with my right hand, holding it up, and I want the loose string to go underneath the held string, which it does. And as it comes round, I yank up the loose string, and I, still keeping the held string taut, I guide it under the loose string, which is sticking up, and then keep there as the string comes round. And then I'm in a position to immediately crop off the excess, really close cut it right to the that round thing, the post we call them. And then I'll go to the G. Now the G obviously and the B and the high E work the opposite way, so I have to kind of do a left-handed thing. So I pull the string back one fret, I tend to hold it with my thumb, and I start the winding over here. It's fairly loosely held. I allow this to be as loose as it needs for the loose string to go under the held string, which it does there. Then I hold tighter with my thumb, and then I hold this up. Then I pick up the string with both hands, and I end up holding it with my left hand to guide it under the loose string which is sticking up, so it gets the same, basically the same locking structure on this side. So that's those two, just over 2 winds are as much as you'll ever need to hold the strings in place without any other mechanisms, and it also keeps the amount of stringing on the peg to a minimum, so that stretching doesn't have to go on forever to get rid of the slack. So I loosen my grip on that held string so the other one can go underneath it. The loose one, tightening up again, keep it tight, lift it up, switch hands, direct the held string under the loose string again as it comes round, and then set it in the slot and be ready to crop it while you've still got good access to it, and then tighten it a bit more so it's not going to go anywhere. So that's my method. The only strings that ever come undone ever on a guitar are occasionally the high thin wound strings if you haven't put enough wind on them, and that's where I believe the idea of tying knots in them has come from historically, from people who've not put quite enough on, thought they'd perhaps put enough on winds on, and then the thing has come undone when they least expected it. But I can promise you the pull 1 fret's worth back method always leaves you enough. It's a little bit over 2 winds, but it leaves you plenty enough, and you never will have a string come undone, whether it's the thin ones, or the truth is you could get away with even less on the wound ones. You just bend it and tighten it, because the nature of the wound string stops it from slipping against itself. But I still like to keep it consistent, so holding the held string above, now sending it underneath the lifted loose string on the second time round, and there it is, neatly set underneath there. So it's very tidy, a known quantity of windings, and that means that when we come to stretch it out, there is a sort of, starts to be a dependable amount of stretching you have to do, that you get used to having to do to stabilize your tuning, which is again what you really want. So over, and as it comes round, under, and get this up and out of the way for good measure. Under, 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 kick your finger out of the way, and snip it flush. I have in the past cut through strings whilst snipping off the excess, so there's that to watch out for, but only a real fool could do that, like me. Right, so that's the sort of close-up view of the stringing business. Now, I've said on many recent videos, because I've done a few videos recently, I've laboured the point that your tuning stability depends on 2 things. Not your tuners, right? That's a really odd, slightly counterintuitive thing to say for some people, but there you go, pull that up. Your tuners have almost nothing to do with tuning stability. Of course, they have to do with the smoothness of your tuning experience, and more gears, better precision, are smoother, more direct and sort of linear feel, but they don't play any role in what we normally call our guitar's inability to stay in tune. That is entirely down to 2 things. 1, the condition of your nut slots, which means whether they're free running, friction free, and made from the right material. So from my point of view, unsullied factory molded slots made out of Teflon, tusk, is the best thing you can have, and at the right height. How effortless is that? Okay, no, we're not finished. So the first thing we do is we stretch the strings. So I'm using a thumb and forefinger method. So it gives you ability to put quite a lot of pressure on the strings, but not so much on the points of fixing. So we don't want to stress them over the nut or the saddle, but we do want to kind of push out as much of the slack that we've got in the strings as possible. So go up and down all of the strings to begin with, and even a bit of a stretch in the string that's after the nut as well is good. So we're looking to just squeeze out all of that slack that may be somewhere in this, what I call the string train, anywhere from the very beginning of the string to the very end, at the end of the windings. Whether it's the string stretching or whether it's this coils tightening up or whatever, or the windings at the ball end kind of stretching to their tightest before they stabilize and don't stretch anymore. Whatever it is, that's what we mean by string slack. So that difference in tuning is the amount of slack we've just squeezed out of it. That's two tones. It's a whole tone, isn't it? What are we on there? They're on A. That's a tone. So that tone, I said on the video yesterday, but sorry if I'm boring you, but that tone that we just wrung out of it, imagine it's divided into 100 cents, and 3 cents, 2 to 3 cents is enough to stand out of tune. So you could say that's 30 to 50 slight detunings in that one stretch alone. We'll do this a few times and probably get another tone's worth of stretch out of it. So we maybe get 60 to 100 repeated detunings by a few cents. And if we just leave those happen naturally, imagine every time you pick up the guitar for 100 times. Every time for the next 100 times you pick the guitar up, it's going to go that little bit out of tune on one or more of its strings. But you could be, that's if that 100 times is if every string went out, it would ruin your experience. But remember, you've got 6 strings, each one can go out of tune 30 times for one tone, and there's 6 of them. So you could say that's not just 30 detunings, that's 180 detunings for one tone. If the detuning that spoils your playing can be one string going out of tune by 3 cents, and then you've got all the others that could go out of tune by 3 cents, times 30 for a tone. If it's 2 tones, times 60, times 3, we're talking, 360 detunings possible in a new set of strings, approximately, right? So let's change that to, imagine that every time you picked up this guitar for 360 times from now on, when you put the new strings on, one string will go 2 cents, 3 cents out of tune for 360 different plays to spoil your enjoyment. Talk about a long, drawn-out effect that you don't want, right? So that's why I recommend you take care of the nut and you take care of the stretching of your slack. Now, the thing about the nut is, even if you did all of the slacking and the nut is still crap, the nut puts your guitar out of tune in a slightly different way, because when it's due to friction in the slots, the nut holds the it prevents the string reaching equilibrium between either side of the nut slot, and when that happens, it backs up a pressure difference, tension difference on one side of the nut to the other, and it'll sit like that. You'll tune it up to where on this side it's playing the right note, but in reality there'll be more tension here than there, and then if you bend it or do something, it'll pull the tension equal, but it will equalize by one side or the other losing its tension, and it will usually be this side, and it will be lose its tension and change its tuning. See, so if you don't take care of the nut slots, you'll never get it in tune, no matter how much tuning you do or stretching you do on the strings. There's the second one. So we're now at a sort of semitone-ish. Ah, hear that? You don't want to hear that. We'll keep an ear on that. Now if we get that ping again on the G string, it may be because the fact the G string is turning a corner as it comes out of the nut. G and D always have that struggle anyway because they're adding extra friction going around the edges of the nut because of the way the headstock spreads them. So it might be that this nut would work perfectly as an electric nut, but it may just be struggling not only with the width but struggling with the turn at the end of it for an acoustic nut. So if it is, I will do a very small width adjustment, or widthening on that slot. Much as I don't want to really interfere with them, I also don't want them to be catching up on the corner because they're not quite wide enough to let the string. It can go around the corner, but it can sort of compound the just barely being wide enough. So I'm doing a different bit of stretch here, and I've got to be very careful that I don't over strain the high E. I don't want to bust it because that's a new set of strings. So I've done 2 thumb and forefinger stretches and another pulling, and we're good in tune. There's a little ting there, heard it. So I know that we've got a very, very slight issue on the G. Now, for that purpose, I'm going to look and think, what am I going to do? G is usually a 17, but it's probably a little bit more than that. Nah. So let's have a gander. Much as I don't want to go into this with any widening things, let's see if we just widen it a tiny bit with this file. Now I'm aiming to not touch the front edge of it. I do not want to lower the playing action, so I'm only concerned about widening the very tiny bit of widening of the nut slot. That's all I want. There you go. Oh yeah. Get done for that. Let's just do a double take on the action. Oh yes, 1.5. 1.5 as well. So we could have come down a little lower on the high E, but you know what? It plays so beautifully. I'm not going to fret over it. Yeah. Oh, let's just double check that is as far in as it will go. It is. So we're good. That is a beaut. there we have it. So that was the process of making the adjustments to Andy's Ibanez parlour style guitar. We've got better spacing here, we've got a lower action here, we've got a flatter neck here, we've got a much better staying in tune nut here with totally positive tuning compared to this bone one, which I obviously will put in the bag with it, but we wouldn't want to revert to that. There's such a benefit of this tusk. I'm not interested in the tonal qualities, but those arguments don't make any sense to me. I know bone's a great material for making nuts and stuff. I go for the tusk because of the Teflon impregnation and the far smaller likelihood of the slots binding. That had a tiny ping in it that I sorted out, but it was nowhere near the gripping that this nut, even though it's been carefully cut by the professionals, it was still holding all those strings and not allowing them to move. So this is a much better solution. Take my word for it. There we have it. And I'm looking forward to seeing Andy tomorrow because he's coming around to collect this, and the proof will be in the pudding of how much nicer it is to play. Let's just double check the relief on the neck. It's way smaller, and I think it's about where I'd want it. Wise men say. Yes, there we are. Like it. All good. Ta-da! Thanks for watching. See you again soon.